Once upon a time, in a bustling marketplace of ancient times, scales were the heart of commerce. Sellers guarded their scales as if they were precious secrets. But there were those who used tricks, adjusting the weights in their favor, charging more while giving less. It's survival, they justified. The problem? Each trick weighed heavier on the scales of injustice. Now, imagine we are no longer in a marketplace, but in a modern world where those scales have been replaced by more sophisticated tools, trade tariffs, and negotiations between countries, much like the old marketplaces, remain arenas of disputes for control and power. In 2018, then-President Donald Trump announced a series of trade tariffs on imported goods, focusing especially on China. He justified this decision as a way to protect American workers and combat unfair global trade practices. But, as in the old marketplaces, the impact of these measures was felt in very different ways by people around the world. Curious about how the Bible connects to modern-day decisions? Stay until the end and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss content like this. Here begins the paradox of this story. A measure that promised protection and justice ended up creating inequality and uncertainty for many. But to understand it, we need to hear the stories behind these decisions. Let's start with John, a farmer from the Midwest of the United States who dedicated his entire life to growing soybeans. John, like his neighboring farmers, had a solid market. He sold tons of his harvest to China. It was a stable business until the tariffs came into play. It was as if the market disappeared overnight, he told a local newspaper. With silos full and no buyers, what was once a predictable and prosperous life became a struggle to keep the farm running. But John was not alone. Thousands of farmers like him faced the impact of retaliatory tariffs imposed by China in response to Trump's trade measures. Many agricultural communities felt the weight of these decisions, with families seeing years of work threatened by something completely out of their control. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, we meet Mary. She owns a small steel factory in Ohio, where she has worked for over a decade. Before the tariffs, Mary often lost contracts to foreign competitors who could offer lower prices. But with Trump's tariffs increasing the cost of importing steel from other countries, Mary's business began to thrive. Finally, we had a chance to compete on equal footing, she said, excited about the surge in demand for her products. And here lies the paradox. While some, like Mary, thrived under the promise of balance and justice, others, like John, faced hardships that seemed to contradict that promise. How could a decision meant to protect end up harming so many? It's a question that takes us directly to the scriptures and reflections on justice. In Proverbs 11 verse 1, we read, "The Lord detests dishonest scales, but delights in accurate weights." This verse takes us back to the fictional marketplace at the beginning of this story. There, a dishonest scale might benefit the merchant in the short term but destroyed trust and balance in the long run. Trump's tariffs were seen by some as an attempt to balance the scales of global trade. However, the question remains, did they truly bring justice? While Mary may have felt they did, John saw the opposite. And for Carla, the consumer who began paying more for basic items at the supermarket, the scales seemed tipped against her. Isaiah 1 verse 17 gives us another perspective. Learn to do right, seek justice, defend the oppressed. This passage is a powerful call to go beyond the immediate impact of our actions and consider their broader consequences. Did the tariffs meet this call for justice? Or did they create new forms of oppression for those already in vulnerable positions? Carla, the average consumer, saw the tariffs translate into higher prices for many products. At first, it was something small, like an increase in the cost of electronics. But over time, these costs began to affect her budget more deeply. "I feel like I'm paying for something that doesn't even concern me," she said, frustrated as she postponed buying a new phone for her child. And while Mary thrived in Ohio, other smaller industries that depended on imported materials began to face difficulties. Roberto, the owner of a small electronics store, saw his profit margins shrink as import costs rose. "The idea of protecting the domestic market is good," he said, but the execution seems to have left many of us behind. These impacts show how political decisions can seem like distant abstractions, but, in reality, shape everyday life in very real and tangible ways. Here lies the irony. What seemed to fix injustices for some created new inequalities for others. And so, we return to our initial question: what is justice? The Scriptures offer principles that can illuminate our decisions, but putting them into practice in a modern world is always a challenge. Is it possible to create policies that truly balance local and global needs? Or will there always be one side that gains more while the other loses? Returning to the marketplace at the beginning of the story, we can imagine the merchants discussing how to make transactions fairer for everyone. It's a simple image but encapsulates something profound. The quest for balance is as old as commerce itself. And in the modern context, it's up to us as a society to decide how we interpret and apply these principles. Are we ready to seek a fairer path? Or are we destined to repeat the cycles of imbalance we've seen before? This was our journey through the impact of Trump's tariffs and the lessons the Bible can offer us about justice and morality. But this story is far from over. Each of us has a role to play in the pursuit of a fairer world, whether as consumers, voters, or simply as concerned citizens. And you? How do you see the balance between justice and progress? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice is an essential part of this discussion. And don't forget, like, share, and subscribe to the channel to continue exploring these connections between faith and modern-day decisions.